Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. I'd like to share with you today part of a book called Sisters of Maryknoll Through Troubled Waters by Sister Mary de Paul Cogan. I read this as a teenager. It was in our library, if you can believe that. And it's about active sisters called Maryknoll Sisters who would go all over the world and preach the gospel to people. And they would learn their language and stuff. Very interesting, because during World War II, they found themselves in the middle of a war. So you would be an American in China or Japan or someplace in the Philippines, and all of a sudden you were in enemy territory and there was a war happening. So it's a little crazy. So these are true stories, and I'm going to read probably two to you. If you have little kids out there, you might want to listen to this first on your own and then see what you think they should hear. Chapter 10. Before the Face of His Cold. To Father Four of Fushun Manchukuo fell the task of carrying to His Excellency the Most Reverend Raymond A. Lane word that a state of war existed between the home of their birth and the power that ruled in the land of their apostolate. Father had received the news over the radio. He started immediately for the center mission. As he pedaled swiftly through the busy marketplace, he saw that already it was placards with anti-American posters. About 8:30 on the evening of December 8, 1941, Sister Lelia and Sister Rita Clare watched some sisters as they safely crossed the compound to Fusion's native novitiate opposite their convent. Sister Lelia, Bishop Lane's voice came from the direction of the small green gate which opened from the west yard into the convent enclosure. The sisters assumed that the bishop, with his unfailing faithfulness, wished to assure them all was well. Shivering from the Siberian cold without apprehension, they picked their way down the icy path with the aid of a small flash bulb. Beyond the gate, the darkness was marked by moving shades of greater darkness, the figures of many people, snow crunched under stomping feet. Sister Lelia, they want us to take a look at the inside of the jail. I'll try to get back in the morning. If I don't return and send you no word, you yourself are to distribute the Blessed Sacrament. My boy has the tabernacle keys. We don't know what is going to happen, but we hope for the best. God bless you all. The bishop's voice was clear, firm, and almost casual. Marching orders were given, and all moved towards the main mission gate outside. There were army trucks that were drawn up, the military about 30, for 4 foreigners and 1 native Chinese priest, silently surrounded the truck and gestured the priest aboard. Father Pei, old and sick, was permitted a seat with the driver. The others swung themselves as best they could over the high body with the truck, and there was no concession or courtesy that night, even for the purple. It couldn't have happened on a better day, gaily called out Father Haggerty, mindful of Our Lady's feast, and with the nimbleness of a squirrel, he bounded into the machine. The motor turned over, gears mashed, wheels whirled, then took hold. The truck moved off carefully. In the glow of its light, we saw the bishop with his hand raised high in blessing, as if he were commanding not only St. Joseph's, but every mission across the great plains beyond the barren mountains, to the loving care of the Heavenly Father, who knew we stood in great need in this hour of peril. We waved our small torch in response, a farewell, and we hoped a signal of courage. Our feelings, though, were rather like those of a small boy whistling in the dark, confesses Sister Lelia. It was a scene enacted that night all over the Far East. Each group of sisters thus left behind in a mission planned and prepared in anticipation of their own arrest. They donned heavy garments, another pair of woolen stockings, perhaps a second habit. They sewed pockets in their clothes for spares, and collected food. For Oriental prisons are not just places of confinement while awaiting trial. In themselves, they are instruments of punishment, dungeon-like and dirty, bleak and bare, cold and clammy. Sister Lelia was to look again on the face of pagan injustice. Shortly before the sisters were removed from Fujian to Mukden, while the Japanese were trying to persuade them to ask for repatriation, Sister Lelia received a summons to the police station with a companion. She answered the call. The two sisters were brought into a room and left standing. Towards one corner were gathered many officials, crowding about something laying on the floor. The screams and cries for aid identified the something as a Chinese. With utmost cruelty and wicked glee, the men, as they circled the prostrate form, took turns beating, kicking, and pricking him. The sisters were helpless to protest the outrage or to protect the victim. Completely shaken, the two slipped out of the room. No attention was given their departure. They never knew if they were brought in on the scene to receive an object lesson. Only face to face with old paganism does one realize that the new pagans of the Western world enjoy the Christian dispensation of charity. 2 years earlier, in 1939, Sister Rita Clare, on a catechetical trip to So Ma Chang in Manchukuo with a native aspirant, was arrested by a zealous official. She was led from police station to police station. Finally, she encountered an official who ruled that so long as she was only teaching the doctrine of the Church, she was innocent of any offense, and he ordered her released. This judgment indirectly aimed at nursing activities of the sisters. An aftermath of this affair was a highly amusing one. A frightened catechumen who witnessed the arrest of Sister Rita Clare rushed to the mission and at the gate breathlessly reported to the old catechist, "Sister Kang has been taken and will be hit to death." To which Mr. Wu replied, "That is not important. When that sister came here, she came with the intention of being martyred." However, the activities of the nurses were curtailed. Catechetical work continued, and any appearance of being intimidated by the occurrence was carefully avoided. At the Chinese mission in Duran, the sisters had suffered in themselves, and more in their people, from the harshness of the police. Sister de Lelis, RN, was making calls upon the sick when a policeman demanded her bag, took it to the station, and she was brought up on charges of treating the sick without authorization and of having in her kit a hypodermic needle. This latter was made to appear a heinous offense. It required some management to quell the anger in the official and to quash the charges against Sister. There were, however, retaliations made on the innocent Chinese, whose ills Sister had attempted to assuage. By evening of the first day of the war, in all of Maryknoll's northern territory, only the sisters in Chinnampo, Korea, were unprepared to set up light housekeeping in a jail. There, a sung mass in honor of the feast of the Immaculate Conception had been carefully and lovingly practiced by the local choir. The day came, and a single Christian was present. Later, as Sister Elenita and Sister Georgia discussed the non-appearance of their Japanese congregation, 3 detectives called at the convent and minutely interrogated Sister Elenita, an excellent language student, as to her proficiency in Japanese, her ability to read Japanese newspapers, to understand radio broadcasts, her knowledge of political affairs. No reasons were offered for the examination, but it was not difficult to believe that a crisis of some kind was at hand. Americans had been suffered not too kindly for a long period. It was about 4:30 that afternoon when, as the convent door was opened in response to an impatient knock, 2 of the morning callers pushed their way in despite the efforts of Father Hunt's boy to announce them. They summoned the two sisters to the police station. As they went to get ready, the men stalked after them into their dormitory, wraps, passports, breviaries, the little money in the house, and the sisters were rushed out without opportunity even to lock the door. Sister Georgia was to discover that the open-door policy made access easier for the police, who searched the place in their absence. On the way to the police station, Sister Elenita managed to give part of the money to Sister Georgia, in case. Dusk falls early in Korean winter. The streets' lights were not on. Chinampo has electricity, but its use is restricted to night hours. The stalls, food, shoes, clothing that lined the streets were boarded up. The few people abroad looked peculiarly square and short in the evening glow, for the weather had reached a low that called for at least 2 padded coats, if one possessed such material wealth. The little party from the convent trudged through the deep snow in procession. A small guard, 2 tall, slim sisters, another small guard, the men well armed. Chinampo ranks as a fair-sized city, but it has few sidewalks. Despite the annual snowfall, there is no effort to clear paths. A narrow passage is made in the drifts by the tread of the passer-by. The police station was within walking distance. The sisters were led into a dimly lighted office occupied by some half-dozen Japanese officials, and filled to saturation with the dense smoke from the heating stove and from cigarettes. Going in from the clear, crisp cold, and 2 newcomers coughed and choked, but were completely ignored by the men. No chairs were forthcoming, so standing in the center of the room, they proceeded to anticipate matins. They were in the second nocturne of the divine office when a guard motioned Sister Alienta to follow him. Sister Georgia was taken to another room, unlighted, and left there for over an hour. Then, without explanation of her companion's whereabouts, and with the not altogether comforting assurance that we are Japanese, so we do not mistreat people, there is no cause for worry, Sister Georgia was assigned the escort of a soldier and sent home. The next day brought confirmation of Sister Georgia's fears that Sister Alienta was in jail, and that Father Hunt, Maryknoll's pastor in Chinampo, was likewise held. The 2 weeks of Sister's prison sojourn were spent by Sister Georgia in work and worry. The church, the rectory, the convent had to be put in order, packaging done, food prepared for the prison, which was sometimes accepted and other times rejected, and it was to be discovered later that the very little ever reached Father Hunt or Sister Alienta. The helper Anne was faithful. The Christians were intimidated. Communication with any other mission was cut off. The police were watchful and very thorough in their search. One budding official, piercing the ceiling with his sword and thrusting in a hand, which he withdrew, trailing cobwebs. A wire was tracked 2 rooms and a hall beyond, only to find that the end dangled loose. One day, Sister Georgia was escorted by her personal bodyguard, Mr. Watanabe, to the railroad station under orders to enter for Hayo. She toiled through the snow against blistering winds from the bay with cases and packages for herself, for Sister Alienta, and for Father Hunt, for she hoped they might be released and exiled with her. She waited and shivered. The escort, very alert, flashed his eyes hither and yon, as if watching for a surprise attack by MacArthur any moment. Finally, from police headquarters came word to return to the convent. So Sister Georgia, with bags and bundles, accompanied by Mr. Wantabi, who pedaled a wheel beside her, returned. By the time they reached their destination, the two were haltingly discussing the Trappists in Japan. Nor did the police neglect to profit by what they evidently considered an excellent opportunity to learn English. Despite Sister George's protests, the teaching role was thrust upon her. On the sound pedagogical principle of proceeding from the known to the unknown, Sister took up the one subject she knew in both English and Japanese, religion. Her methods were not unmodern. As visual aid, she used the Jesus and I chart. For phonics and reading, she used the accompanying text. For memory training, the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Act of Contrition. The high spots of time of waiting were the occasions when food was accepted at the prison. The day when the Korean aspirant sent by Sister Eugenia, regional superior of the sisters in Korea, got through, and when Father Hunt from prison directed Sister Georgia to consume the sacred hosts. When Sister Alentia was led from the police office, she was taken down to the jail cells. En route, she met Father Hunt, likewise in custody. The cell block opened on a corridor where there was a desk of authority and some dozen police in attendance. No charges were made, but Sister was subject to insults and indignities. Sister Alinta recounts her experiences to Mother Mary Joseph. They made certain I was not concealing papers on my person. In my embarrassment, I turned round, only to find 2 cells full of men pressed against the bars watching me. Most of these prisoners were decent, but a few called out coarse remarks. At that moment I determined I would be stupid to any form of Japanese address except that of courtesy. Mother, you advised that we sisters let our bobbed hair grow long in case we should have to adopt lay dress. Fortunately for me, my hair was shoulder length. The Japanese women traditionally wear long hair. The only exception may be a few in the international set. I think short hair would have lowered me, if possible, in the eyes of the police, although being without comb, brush, pins, or string to use as a ribbon, I must soon have appeared as a wild woman. After the examination, the open cell doors seemed almost an avenue of escape. I was to find it had its own trial. I was never charged with a crime. I was never tried. I was never condemned to punishment. I was just forcibly pushed into a cell and locked up. I was the 5th woman in the cell. My companions were Koreans. In my 15 days there, without the bond of common tongue, I was to experience friendliness and kindliness, the generosity and something of delicacy of these people. I never knew of what they were accused, but when I was dismissed, as unexpectedly as I had been arrested, I had one regret. I could not return to my companions and smile my thanks. About 8:30 o'clock on the first night, a guard called and asked if I had eaten. I hadn't since noon. In a little while he stuck through a hole in the bottom of the cell door some bread and a cup of water in a dirty tin. 24 hours later, another piece of bread and a tin of water were given me. Then I was put on regular service, 3 meals a day of poor quality rice and a red bean as relish, a small dried salt fish or a piece of pickled turnip. One of the poor dears used to save me something from her plate, apparently thinking I needed or was accustomed to more. The little act probably called for heroic charity on both sides. She was hungry and used to but the bare essentials of life, and you know those necessities to an Oriental are pitifully scant. As for me, I regretted that I had anticipated the peck we used to say we had to take before we die. Our drink was water, a couple of cups stuck in and passed from one to another. When we returned then, they were just stacked up without washing, ready for the next time. The toilet arrangement was a trap in the floor, uncovered, never cleaned, and without privacy. We had no means of washing. It was an offense to go to sleep without tin. At that time, the guard made the rounds and would track with a bamboo pole stuck through the bars any offender. I was guilty twice. The first time the roar of the guards startled me so I hopped away from the stick, and the second time one of my little friends wakened me. We slept and ate and had our living on the stone floor, below ground level, without the aid of chair or table or pallet, and in stocking feet with scant clothing. It was bitter chill and cold. These privations seemed mere inconveniences in comparison with the dreaded examinations and the daily questioning. Each morning, I, with the other prisoner, was examined to see if I had acquired anything new. Each afternoon I was taken into the hall before the police, dreaded these interviews, for the men quite freely discussed me, cast doubts on my way of life, made fun of religious practices, like mocking the sign of the cross. I used to hope that the dirt on my face would hide the color that their obscene remarks brought to my cheeks. I stuck to my resolution to not understand low forms of Japanese, and of observing the best form of Japanese etiquette myself. Poor Father Hunt wasn't faring much better than I. As I passed his cell each day to be questioned, he gave me his blessing, occasionally when the guards were not looking. By standing close to the wall, separating our cells, we could speak to each other. His voice was a bit shy. The day he asked if his boy could give me house shoes. How grateful I was. Once I had received permission from the guard to have his boy bring me a pair of bedroom slippers. These were almost a necessity, as the corridor floor was often sloppy, wet, and my feet had swollen from chilblains. I regretted this move, for the next time I appeared, and a guard saw the slippers on my feet, he grabbed them off, kicked them across the floor, and pushed me forcibly back to the cell. The fellow who had granted the request for the slippers looked on indifferently. This was the one and only time I cried, but the guards didn't know it. I was determined to prove to them that American women were sturdy. They considered us soft. I used my high Japanese manners, with but one exception. We had a couple of dirty, torn blankets to sleep on. One day one of the companions picked up a patch that was torn off and sat on it in a corner. A guard discovered it. He accused the poor soul of tearing the blanket and went to beat her. I could not take it, and I turned in fury on him. My breath froze in the frigid air, but for once I felt good and warm. I'm sure it must have been my looks that made him desist. I'm not small for an American, so I loomed large. My unkempt hair stuck out at all angles. Perhaps I would have been less brave had the guard picked on someone other than my special friend. So far as I could make out from sign language, this woman was the mother of a large family. Her big heart took me in, and she would do little things for me, like rubbing my stiff fingers between her own worn hands. While the hardness of the floor would not interfere with the rest of the Koreans, the lack of heat would disturb them. An adobe house has a raised platform, lined with bricks like an oven. At one end of the dais is built a stove, in which wood and dried leaves are burned. The heat from the stove goes into the flue, and the smoke finds its way out by a chimney running up the opposite wall. On this king the people lie down to sleep and sit up to eat. So the poorest have some degree of heat to temper the long winter of sub-zero cold. Sister Elenita continues, Mother, I had my breviary. It is still a wonder why I was allowed to keep my book, for the Japanese seem to suspect print not in characters. I made my herorium around the hours of the divine office, and it was wonderful to know that I could live the life of our sisters everywhere. I had to anticipate matins and lauds, as our only light was from the corridor. The kind little women respected my prayer time and would not eat until I said grace. After all, our trays didn't impel a rush to dinner. but if I delayed, one of the women would poke me and try to make the sign of the cross to remind me. At first I knew what fear was, but that gave way to a deep, abiding joyousness of spirit. The beautiful office of St. Lucy reminded me of the source of all strength. When you shall stand before kings and governors, take no thought how or what to speak, for it shall be given to you in that hour what to speak. For it is not you that speaks, but the Holy Ghost. I shall always have particular devotion to this office. Thereafter I faced my inquisitors with greater assurance. Then the communion of Maryknoll Sisters reached into my cell, and I recalled at home in our lovely Mother House chapel vigils were kept day and night, and I thrilled at the remembrance of our precious cloistered sisters sacrificing for missionaries, among whom I was privileged to be numbered. You seemed, Mother, to have enfolded us in a warm mantle of prayer. It was long ago and far away that inspired psalmist saying, He shall send out his word and shall melt them. His wind shall blow and the waters shall run. My breviary was a good calendar. My Christmas observance I planned in advance. I would rise and keep watch from 11 to 12 on the eve, as I knew all the sisters would be doing no matter what the difficulties. I had in my breviary, Mother, a nativity card you gave me years ago. This would be the poor crib at which I would adore the newborn babe, where I would pray my thanks for you, make intercession for the church, the world, my native land, missionaries, Maryknolls, and my poor Japanese people. I don't think I was unduly tense, certainly not emotional. I looked forward to being held indefinitely. God was just merciful to me when everything else was taken. So one looks out through prison gratings to the stars. But on the 23rd, when I was called for the routine examination, I was told I was to be escorted home, was to pack and to leave the next day for Yingyu, where the other sisters were being interred. At one time I had been told that Sister Georgia was here. My clothes were returned, bearing all the marks of careful searching, and then being thrown down carelessly. I made the required thank you for hospitality towards my unworthy self, and walked out, not exactly free, but freed from jail. Soon, too, was I free from the accumulated grime of over 2 weeks, and I sat down and enjoyed the fatted calf produced from a tin by Sister Georgia. We talked all night, for I had to hear Sister's experience and to tell her my story, but we were on time at the police station and for our train. Not before a bill had been presented Sister Georgia for my board in the jail. It was the day before Christmas. And I think we've ran out of time for today, but next Wednesday I'll try and read another story from this. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.